Thank you everybody for coming out today. I'm really excited for this panel. I'll introduce myself first, then I'll send it down to everybody else to introduce themselves, and then we'll get it started. So I'm Brett Wags. I lead growth here at Goat Network. I'm really excited for this panel today.
I'm Boaz from StarkWare, from the product team, focusing on Bitcoin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Serrano. I am the head of product at Bitcoin L2 Labs. We're a core development company on the Stacks Bitcoin Layer 2.
Hey everyone, my name is Piyush. I'm head of ecosystem at Bima. We're building stablecoin backed by Bitcoin as a collateral.
I'm Jag. I'm from Syscoin. We've been around for about 10 years, 10 plus years. We're ID 57 on CMC, so one of the first 50-ish coins.
It's a fun fact. All right. So I guess first question, why do we need Bitcoin Layer 2s now more than ever? And what specific limitations of the L1 are they solving? And, I'll open up to anybody to start off.
I think the Bitcoin Layer 1 network is fundamentally challenged by its lack of programmability. So Bitcoin has a more limited scripting language that doesn't have full smart contract capabilities. And so Bitcoin Layer 2s are able to offer access to Bitcoin for expressive smart contracts where you can actually use Bitcoin in DeFi for a variety of applications and use cases, deploying Bitcoin in DEXs and lending protocols, yield protocols, things like that. And so ultimately providing a more expressive programming environment for Bitcoin. And there's also some user experience improvements as well, where typically your average Bitcoin transaction takes about an hour to settle, which is feels like a lifetime compared to the state-of-the-art L1 blockchains out there. And so really Bitcoin L2s are able to offer a faster, cheaper user experience for Bitcoin, better development experience. So yeah, I think that's really why they're needed.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point that people on the L1, it's too slow, it's too expensive. Also, if I'm going to send $100 to somebody, it's going to charge me $40 in transaction fees. It's just too expensive. Anybody else want?
Yeah, maybe I can take it. So I think in general, directly doing anything on Bitcoin, okay, runes and all that stuff is there, but still, it's kind of expensive. Okay, we can even enable runes back stable, like what we are doing. Okay, I mean, still, it will need the kind of environment which is more user friendly, for developer friendly as well. So I think maybe EVM, non-EVM, whatever chain it is, build on top of it. Makes sense to build apps, and in the end, like user experience matter. So I think directly transactions is expensive, so that's how Bitcoin L2s make sense.
I think it's just like Bob outlined in the keynote. So the problems currently are scalability and programmability, and I would also add the UX, like you just said. It's very expensive. It takes a lot of time. It's a terrible user experience. And all these problems can be addressed by scaling Bitcoin with an L2. And also, I think it takes off. So as Bitcoin people, I think we want to preserve the original values of Bitcoin that made it so great. And there's a lot of pressure on Bitcoin to change and evolve to suit like bigger players in the economy. And I think that we want to circumvent that possibility by allowing Bitcoin to scale through the L2s and not directly on the L1 itself.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point there. And that's really why we saw the rise of ETH L2s, right? Like, people wanted cheaper, faster ETH. And, we took a look at Arbitrum, Metis, Optimism. Like, that's where that kind of idea came from.
Yeah, I think building off of that too, I think that the lack of programmability on Bitcoin L1 is why a lot of Bitcoin is traded on centralized venues. And so, unfortunately, Bitcoin holders have been impacted over the years by a lot of the vulnerabilities of trusting your Bitcoin with centralized actors, whether it's BlockFi, Gox, Celsius, et cetera. And so, Bitcoin L2s really provide the opportunity to use Bitcoin in more decentralized applications where you can ideally reduce or minimize the amount of new security and trust assumptions that you're at to really unlock these sorts of use cases for, being able to, actually use Bitcoin as a collateral asset. And that's what it is. Bitcoin is pristine collateral. You should be able to borrow against it. You should be able to earn yield on it. And the ability to really unlock that capability, I think, is an enormous opportunity.
No, I totally agree with everything you said on that one. I think it's a really important point, which kind of leads me to my next question. What qualifies a solution as a true Bitcoin layer 2, and how do ZK rollups, BitVM based architectures, and commit chain models, compare in terms of trust assumptions and alignment with Bitcoin based layer applications?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, Bitcoin is the game of it is to be simple, not to complicate things. Because as Matt Crawler would say, Meevil is a big problem. It can cripple the blockchain if you don't design it properly. And you're seeing with 4844, 1559, all these other things on Ethereum, it gets complex, right? And if you don't keep things simple, then the store value concept can degrade quickly, especially due to the fact that it's a deflationary asset. Its main goal is to be a store of value. So then you focus on layer 2s. Our core thesis is the logical computer that gets created here is Bitcoin as a store of value. You have something like consensus layers, merge mining, that sort of stuff. Actually, my thesis is merge mining is the key to it all. And then layer 2s get created through a ZK stack, and you have shared liquidity and all these other decentralized sequencing and all this stuff. That ZK stack is important because that's your computer. And then the vaulting and the gas and all the other asset aspect of it could be Bitcoin. But tying that together is hard. And this is what Blockstream focused on for many years, was how do we scale through side chains or do federated stuff. With BitVM, it's changed the game a little bit. The cap theorem is being replaced. The cap theorem of Bitcoin is very simple. It's longest chain rule, the difficulty algorithm, make sure that things are always available. As long as one honest miner exists, it's safe. If you start to introduce side chains, if there's Bitcoin stuck in some sort of bridge, then you're trusting the side chain. And that's not good enough for Bitcoiners, right? Like, would Michael Saylor put his funds in that? I don't think so. My true test is designing something such that he would say, yeah, I can see why my funds might want to go there. So it's really hard to design these things without thinking about those aspects and designing around the little intrinsic pieces that can break.
Yeah, and our thesis and my personal opinion is that a BitVM kind of L2 is going to be the winner, right? There's many different solutions that people are working on. Personally, I think that the BitVM two-way is probably the end all be all, at least for the next 5 to 10 years.
I think in general, if you see every chain, whichever is Ethereum L2 or whatever, they want to become itself a Bitcoin L2 in the end, because they know the value is Bitcoin in the end. So they are trying to bring more BTC. Like, even you mentioned BitVM based stuff. Fiamma is doing great stuff, and they are going every chain on every chain as well, which is like, okay, we have BTC on Bitcoin main chain in trustless fashion. How you can go on other chains, which matters. Okay, I agree. BitVM can be a big deal. Now, which BitVM is a question as well. So let's see. I mean, I'm bullish, but have to see like which will be the end goal.
Yeah, I take a more expanded view on the definition of what is a Bitcoin layer 2, which is really a network can extend the functionality of Bitcoin and ideally do that in a way that minimizes the trust assumptions. And when you look at the landscape of Bitcoin layers, you're making trade-offs with it. And ultimately, I think the Bitcoin layer 2 that's going to win is the one that's able to really aggregate the most amount of Bitcoin liquidity and unlock these new use cases. And so I think, I'm also very excited about BitVM longer term, but I think that, we still haven't seen one in production yet, right? So I think at least the approach with Stacks, it's, let's move quickly. We've developed the largest ecosystem of Bitcoin native applications that are, providing yield and doing borrow lend on chain today. And trying to scale up and build the liquidity while doing that long-term R&D and not necessarily waiting until it's ready today.
Yeah, which shout out to Stacks for kind of building that liquidity hub, as you said, and kind of the ecosystem you guys have built, over the last few years. All right, next question: how can Bitcoin L2s balance programmability with minimalism without compromising on self-custody or censorship resistance? One that Michael Saylor will use.
Yeah, it's keeping things simple, but really focusing on the USP of vaulting, right? Because that's the core part of this is what Linus gave us with BitVM, it allowed us to transpose the cap theorem between these layers. Traditionally, you would need a new consensus in between a bridge to be able to move Bitcoin over, and then the trust assumptions start to break down because it's not as secure. So BitVM and merge mining actually gives you ability to create, impose the cap theorem of Bitcoin onto the bridge. So this means that, you know, there are some people building ZK rollups right on Bitcoin and using the data, store it right on Bitcoin, right? And the longest chain rule of Bitcoin is securing that. So if your finality of your bridge is 2 weeks, as long as Bitcoin doesn't roll back far as 2 weeks, your system is safe. And that's a fair assumption. I think most people agree that's probably pretty safe. The problem is when you start to say the side chain, if the side chain rolls back for more than 2 weeks, then the bridge isn't safe. That's not good enough. And the idea is that you'd want to be able to secure yourself based on Bitcoin, but have the flexibility of a side chain. So there are solutions that put things right on Bitcoin. Maybe an opcode or StarkWare is trying to do is put something into Bitcoin with Starks. But the data itself, it's still creates a bottleneck. And so it necessitates the need to do other things on the side, and that creates side chains, as Bob was saying, space chains or whatever. So that aspect is a hard problem that no one has solved, and we've been focused on that for many years. We released a white paper today, actually, on this to use merge mining tags to put into Bitcoin and have an assumption of one honest miner. So as long as there's one honest operator, that's BitVM, plus one honest miner, your system is safe. And as long as Bitcoin doesn't roll back between that finality period. So it's really interesting. And I think, you know, we're pushing the boundaries, and it's a real cool time to be developing in it.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. And, you know, a lot of people in the BTC space, I think, are more wary of putting their BTC on chain than, you know, ETH. You know, there's degens that will send 20 ETH, you know, to the wrong contract address, where, you know, more people in BTC kind of take that security assumptions way more serious.
I think self-custody is tough part. Like how exactly you give like BTC holders on Bitcoin main chain, let's say self-custody, and then enable it on any other chain. That's a tough part. I'm not sure if BitVM is able to solve it, but if it, I mean, it's a big deal. Like even in our case, we are also, you know, running a succinct verifier to have kind of a self-custodial fashion, which, okay, I cannot reveal much, but that can solve somewhat big problem. That, okay, I mean, MicroStrategy or any other folks, they will not bring or bridge their BDC at all. Like they want their BDC to be sitting on Bitcoin main chain. So how we can solve that? Okay, so okay, Bitcoin backed stable can be a solution. That, okay, we can enable it on multiple chains based on, you know, Starknet, based on Goat, Stacks, or whatever. Like any chain we can enable it, be it, okay, that is connection is coming from that chain ultimately. Said, okay, the folks are very much into that chain. They want to generate yield from that chain, so we can enable that. And that can be a big deal where BDC cannot be, like, they don't have to even move their BDC. So let's see how things go, but I think self custody is a big deal to tackle.
Yeah, I'll just add on. I think self-custody, I think the point is spot on. Self-custody is going to be a critical unlock for a lot of these Bitcoin holders, and it's a huge opportunity. We speak to a lot of large holders regularly, and there's probably at least 100 billion in capital that is sitting in cold storage, has never touched a Bitcoin bridge in the past, and they're waiting for some sort of self-custody option, more permissionless option, to be able to, you know, actually start generating yield on their Bitcoin. So it's currently where a lot of our R&D efforts are focused, is to understand, is there a way to do some sort of time lock on Bitcoin that would allow you to keep the Bitcoin in self-custody. The underlying Bitcoin doesn't move unless you've actually signed a transaction for it, but you can still deploy a derivative on layer 2 for these sorts of DeFi use cases. So it's a tough problem to crack, but I think it's a huge opportunity if we can get there.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people are looking for yield on their Bitcoin. They just don't know how to generate the yield, or you know, where it would come from.
Yeah, in a safe way.
Totally. If
Right.
you don't know where your yield's coming from, you are the yield.
Yeah.
You know, that's really the most important thing when people are trying to figure out where the yield's coming from. You know, next thing, which puts us to the next topic, do Bitcoin L2s require changes to Bitcoin Core, or in the long run, can they thrive entirely off chain?
So I think that the idea needs to be that you always want to be as trust minimized as possible, or at least that's the idea we're running with in StarkNet, and I think some of my colleagues as well. So you always want to be pushing for the least trust the most trust minimized solution that you can get to, but which for us at least, if Opcat would be enabled tomorrow, then we're done with the trust minimization. It'll be completely self-custodial, and will be, again, like you said, it's a huge unlock, and we can do basically have like a pure L2 for Bitcoin, but that might not happen in several years, even if we personally would like to see it happen sooner. But we need to start pushing the envelope and start developing now to be ready for when that happens. So again, in StarkWare, we're trying to push all of the directions at the same time. So if it's research, if it's UX, if it's developing, if it's enhancing dev tools and stuff for the Bitcoin ecosystem, and I know that a lot of my colleagues here are doing the same, we need to start building today and hope that it gets there at some point.
Yeah, I think, building up to try and get that in the next, call it 3 to 5 years, is really the end goal for everybody.
Yeah, I think congrats on the Runes bridge, by the way. That's an amazing deal to bring it on StarkNet. But I think on the other side, like if you see like every BDC L2, okay, Opcat is the end goal. Everyone wants that. Agree. No one knows when it's going to happen. That's why, okay, we have to start somewhere. That's how we are also taking like some steps that, okay, in a self-custodial fashion, is there any other approach? So we came up with this approach, okay, StarkNet. So I think small steps everyone have to take. And then, okay, whenever that end goal will be there, how exactly that look like? Because ultimately it's going to change the Bitcoin main chain as well. So how exactly that will react, that we have to see as well. But yeah, bullish either way.
I had a question. If Opcat was enabled, would the Stark be directly verifiable within a single transaction? Is that the goal? You don't need BitVM after that?
Yeah, that's our goal.
Okay, and then would you be able to enshrine a bridge as well, or like the data availability and bridging? That would be assumption of like you just storing it in op return and
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's I think CSFS is okay. I think people are moving away from Opcat now, and there's these templated functions you could use for CSFS, and even Blockstream guys propose that individual templates should be enabled with separate opcodes just for safety reasons, because the fee market would be different based on each individual use case. But with CSFS, you can actually make BitVM more trust minimized, more trustless, because anyone can join as an operator. Right now, it requires a trusted setup. Like you have 5 operators, the 5 operators have to agree in a ceremony, they have to create transactions amongst themselves, and then one of them has to be online. With CSFS, it removes that assumption. So it pushes to the next level. However, it does create more complexity at the base, right? So I would say as it is today, you can create trust minimized solutions and it'll work, and Bitcoin doesn't need to change. Its utility function remains the same. However, if we do want to get to the next level of a little bit more programmability, maybe some Starks can help on there. We can, have verification directly and not need a one event assumption. I still think there's a need or a useful utility for a sidechain to be able to do more, because you would be able to decentralize the sequencing, decentralize the data availability, some of these things that you may not want to put on Bitcoin because it won't prune, right? And the full nodes of Bitcoin are going to get larger and larger as these solutions come. Like Citria is another roll up, and the concern is that they're going to use a lot of data on Bitcoin, and it may cause problems. So that's precipitating the need for people to look at these BIPs again, which is a good thing. And I hope maybe one of them gets enabled and we could get maybe past this trusted setup phase in BitVM, or maybe a direct Stark integration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's kind of where we're headed, and hopefully in time those things will kind of evolve around themselves. Last question, I think, and I think everyone's answer is going to be very different here. What is the current bottleneck? Developer traction, user adoption, Bitcoin protocol constraints, what is the kind of bottleneck around these different L2s?
So I think all of what you mentioned are bottlenecks, and I think that none of them are a bottleneck, if that makes sense. I think that we can do it now. Like, we can push the all of these topics, and there's nothing really holding us back too firmly. Like we said, okay, if OPCAT will never be enabled, or only in 5 years, there's still a lot of steps we can take to get more trust minimization on the path, right? It's a spectrum. And all of these, so the UX now is basically terrible, but we can make it better and better and better. So all of these fronts, we can take a lot of steps, and everybody here are taking a lot of active steps in order to make things better and better. It won't happen in a day, and it probably won't be the end all solution in the next 2 to 3 years. But if we want to be ready when everything is when we can enable all of these solutions, then we have to start today. So I think that all of these things are somewhat of a bottleneck, but none of them is really a bottleneck if we were willing to like put in the work.
Yeah, I think for the past 2 years, a lot of the bottleneck has been on the infrastructure side. We've really been in this infrastructure development period where, a lot of Bitcoin L2s were funded, doing, R&D around, these more trust minimized bridges. And we're just now getting to the point where a lot of these projects are starting to come to market. So on Stacks, we had our Nakamoto upgrade at the end of last year that allowed for, more performant transactions. A step towards trust minimized bridging with SBTC. Obviously, a lot of projects are coming to market over the remainder of this year with different bridge implementations and scale and different roll-up models. And so we're starting to transition out of the infrastructure phase into the growth phase, where it's really going to come back down to user growth and adoption, onboarding developers to create new applications and use cases for Bitcoin. So I think we're in transition phase right now, but really setting up for exciting 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like, I was at the talk yesterday with IOHK, and they were showing off a new BitVMX bridge that Risk guys were working on. And David of Babylon was saying that there's tons of demand if you build it. 10,000 Bitcoin came in when they opened it up the limits, and they still don't know who it was. But he's sitting there yielding, and there's definitely demand. And I saw the UX; it's pretty good. They're able to make it user friendly, almost TradFi like. It's getting there. For me, it's the critical thing is when people start trusting this thing and putting real money in it, it can't break, and it's got to be stable and secure and safe and as decentralized as possible. And I'm sort of a perfectionist in that way, and so I try to, create these solutions that will be battle tested in adversarial conditions as much as possible. And really, it's opinionating your design around Bitcoin was sort of our thesis in 2014, 2013, and it's still carried on to today. Many of the chains, layer ones, they moved away to POS or some other designs, and they may be rethinking that. Like, maybe you can still have proof of work and scale in a modular way. And yeah, that's it. In terms of technical, there's a lot of work to do to make that a reality, to make the ideal design to scale Bitcoin with a sidechain. But in terms of creating a BitVM bridge and using it today, I don't think there's that much left. You don't need OpCat. You don't need any of these. It should work.
I mean, look, every chain is there. Like, how many BDC L2s are there? I don't know. I cannot count even. Like, everyone. But how much liquidity, how much BTC they have, that's a big scalability issue. Like, okay, after 2 billion, 10 billion, what next? Are they able to acquire more? That's a big issue, I guess. What I feel is already there, which, okay, I mean, if one chain can absorb a big, I mean, there's like, it won't be like only one chain will be able to absorb. So it makes sense to even have more and more BDCL2s. But are we able to bring in more liquidity, Bitcoin liquidity on BDCL2s? Because if you see, you know, don't take it otherwise, but whenever any BDCL2 go TGE, their TVL goes down. That's a harsh reality. Everyone is facing it. But are we able to, bring that TVL back into the chain? That's a big question. So I believe like scalability and longevity of the chain, BTC L2s in general. That's a question for me. That how exactly that will look like.
I really believe that we are at the start of what BTC L2s are. I kind of compare this to what ETH L2s were kind of in 2021. I really believe that, as we scale these BTC L2s, more and more people will start using them. That TVL will flowing in and really kind of hitting that inflection point and taking off like ETH L2s. Awesome. Thank you everybody for joining today. I really enjoyed this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.